She lived in a glass mansion where millions were spent on a single dinner, yet she sneaked out every evening just to share a crust of dry bread with a man who had nothing. The world called him a destitute nobody, a failure struggling to raise his daughter in a crumbling garage. But when the billionaire elite tried to tear them apart, a sealed DNA file dropped on the mahogany table, and the entire room broke down in absolute tears. Because the man she called Pauper wasn't just a stranger. He was the missing piece of a multi-billion-dollar empire. Welcome to HeartNest Stories, where every story reminds us that one small act of kindness can change someone's life forever. If you enjoy emotional stories filled with hope, compassion, and unforgettable life lessons, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to HeartNest Stories, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next inspiring journey. Now, let's begin today's unforgettable story. Elena Vance lived a life that most people only saw in cinematic fantasies. Her father, Harrison Vance, was a ruthless real estate magnate whose name commanded absolute fear and respect across the city. Their home was a sprawling architectural masterpiece of glass, steel, and imported Italian marble, perched high on the cliffs overlooking the glittering skyline. Yet, despite the vast wealth, the mansion felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum. Harrison Vance was a man of numbers, contracts, and power. To him, human beings were merely assets on a balance sheet. Elena's mother had passed away when she was young, leaving her in the care of a rotating cast of cold, professional nannies and guards. At 18, Elena had everything money could buy, but she lacked the one thing every soul craved: genuine warmth. Across town, in a district forgotten by the city's glittering progress, lived Arthur Pendleton. Arthur was a single father trying to keep his head above water. 3 years prior, a catastrophic corporate buyout had stripped him of his life savings and his job as a senior structural engineer. Betrayed by a corrupt firm, ironically, a subsidiary of Vance Enterprises, Arthur was left with crippling debt and the sole responsibility of raising his 5-year-old daughter, Lily. They lived in a converted auto repair garage with leaking tin roofs and concrete floors that seeped cold air during winter. Arthur worked 3 separate jobs, as a night watchman, a freelance mechanic, and a grocery stocker, just to afford Lily's specialized asthma medication and a meager plate of food. Despite their poverty, the garage was filled with laughter, hand-drawn pictures taped to the walls, and stories whispered under a patchwork quilt. Arthur never let Lily feel the crushing weight of their destitution. To her, her father was a superhero who could build anything out of scrap metal. The fateful collision of these two completely opposite worlds happened on a torrential Tuesday evening. Elena, suffocating under the weight of another mandatory, superficial gala hosted by her father, slipped out of the side security gate in her chauffeur-driven luxury sedan. She told the driver to wait, but instead walked 3 blocks down into the working-class alleyways, craving a moment of absolute anonymity. Caught unawares by a sudden, violent cloudburst, Elena sprinted down a narrow alley and slipped on a patch of oil, twisting her ankle and crashing hard against a corrugated metal wall. She winced in pain, her designer silk dress stained with muddy water. That was when Arthur stepped out of his garage holding a large plastic tarp to secure a leaking window. Seeing the distressed young woman, he didn't hesitate. He didn't care about her expensive clothes or the luxury watch glinting on her wrist. He only saw a human being in pain. "Easy there, take it slow," Arthur said softly, his voice a deep, comforting baritone weathered by exhaustion. He scooped her up effortlessly and carried her into the warm, brightly lit interior of the garage. Sitting on an old, floral-patterned sofa, Elena looked around in absolute bewilderment. The walls were lined with wooden shelves stacked with hand-carved wooden animals and mismatched books. Lily, hearing the commotion, padded out in her oversized dinosaur pajamas, clutching a rag doll. "Is the lady hurt, Daddy?" Lily asked with wide, innocent eyes. "She took a spill in the rain, sweet pea. Let's get her ankle iced," Arthur replied gently. For the next 2 hours, Elena sat in that humble garage, sipping warm chamomile tea from a chipped ceramic mug. For the first time in her life, nobody asked her about her father's net worth, her social standing, or her Ivy League ambitions. They talked about favorite colors, stars in the night sky, and the simple joy of finding a stray cat. When her driver finally tracked her down via her phone's GPS, Elena felt an unusual pang of reluctance to leave. Within a week, Elena's clandestine visits to the garage became a nightly ritual. She would sneak out after dinner, pulling on a worn denim jacket and sneakers to blend in. The garage transformed into her sanctuary. She helped Lily with her early reading homework, listened to Arthur's tired sighs, and occasionally brought along simple groceries. Though she had to be careful not to bring anything too lavish that would bruise Arthur's proud spirit. Arthur and Elena formed a quiet, profound bond. He admired her quiet intelligence and the deep empathy she possessed, despite being raised in a world designed to strip empathy away. Elena, on the other hand, found a pillar of unbreakable strength in Arthur. He was a man who had lost everything: his status, his wealth, his career, yet possessed an inner wealth that no stock market crash could ever touch. One evening, while helping Arthur sort through a box of old documents he was using to insulate a workbench, Elena noticed a faded corporate photograph. It showed a younger Arthur standing proudly in front of an architectural blueprint alongside a familiar face, Harrison Vance. Elena's breath hitched. "Arthur, you worked for Vance Enterprises?" Arthur's face tightened, a shadow of deep pain passing across his eyes. He set the photograph down slowly. "I used to, back when it stood for innovation and integrity. Before Harrison Vance sold his soul to corporate greed, crushing independent developers to build his monopoly. He ruined my life, Elena. He stole my designs, framed me for industrial espionage when I refused to sign a fraudulent NDA, and threw me out onto the street with nothing." Elena froze, her blood running cold. The man who had given her shelter, kindness, and a sense of family was destroyed by the very man who brought her into this world. Panic and guilt warred violently inside Elena's chest. Every luxury she enjoyed, the penthouse, the sports cars, the designer gowns, was built on the rubble of Arthur's life. She wanted to confess right then and there, "I am Harrison Vance's daughter. I am the monster's blood." But the words caught in her throat. She was terrified that if Arthur knew the truth, he would look at her with the same bitter hatred he held for her father. She couldn't bear the thought of losing the only true connection she had ever known. For 3 days, Elena stayed away from the garage. She locked herself in her bedroom, staring at the walls of her sterile luxury prison, weeping silently. Arthur, noticing her absence, grew deeply concerned, checking the corner of the street every evening in the hope of seeing her familiar denim jacket. On the 4th day, Arthur suffered a medical emergency. Driven to absolute exhaustion by working 3 jobs and skipping meals to ensure Lily had proper shoes for school, his body simply gave out. While stocking shelves at the local market, he collapsed from severe exhaustion and a sudden spike in blood pressure. An anonymous tip called the emergency services, but because Arthur had no active health insurance, the local county hospital provided only stabilization before discharging him with a mountain of expensive prescriptions he couldn't possibly afford. Lily, terrified and alone in the garage, while her father rested weakly on the cot, remembered Elena mentioning the name of her college campus. Desperate, the 5-year-old managed to dial a number from an old business card Elena had accidentally left behind. When Elena answered, hearing Lily's tearful, trembling voice saying, "Daddy won't wake up right. Please help us," Elena's heart stopped. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed her father's emergency black credit card, jumped into her sports car, and sped through the city streets like a madwoman. When she burst through the garage door, she found Arthur pale, shivering under a thin blanket, struggling to draw a breath. Without thinking twice, Elena dialed a private, elite medical concierge service paid for by her father's corporate account. Within 20 minutes, a fully equipped private medical team arrived, transferring Arthur to a premier private recovery suite. However, Harrison Vance's security network was formidable. Tracking his daughter's vehicle and the emergency corporate card usage, Harrison himself arrived at the hospital suite just as Arthur was waking up on a crisp linen bed. "Elena, what on earth is the meaning of this?" Harrison's cold, booming voice echoed through the sterile white room. He stepped in, flanked by 2 towering bodyguards. "Associating with street trash? Squandering company funds on a bankrupt nobody." Arthur blinked, his gaze locking onto Harrison Vance. 10 years of suppressed fury rushed back into his eyes. "Vance," he rasped, gripping the bedsheets. Harrison stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes narrowing as he recognized the man he had ruthlessly pushed aside a decade ago. Pendleton, I thought you faded away years ago. What are you doing sinking your claws into my daughter? Dad, stop it. It's not like that. Elena screamed, stepping between them, tears streaming down her face. He is a good man. You destroyed his life. You stole everything from him. Harrison laughed coldly. Business is war, Elena. Weak men get trampled. If he couldn't protect his intellectual property, it was his own fault. You framed him. Elena shouted, her voice echoing down the corridor. I found the files in his garage. You forged the espionage charges. Before Harrison could dismiss her claims, the hospital room door swung open again. It was Arthur's older sister, who had arrived from out of state after hearing about his collapse, clutching an old, heavily sealed legal archive box she had kept safe for years. He didn't just forge the charges, a firm, older voice stated. An elderly retired judge, who had been a silent whistleblower on Vance's early corporate board, stepped forward alongside Arthur's sister. He buried the truth because Arthur wasn't just an employee, Harrison. He was your equal partner when you both started Vance Enterprises out of a basement 25 years ago. The room fell into an absolute, suffocating silence. Harrison Vance's arrogant expression faltered for the first time in decades. The retired judge stepped forward and laid a thick, yellowed adoption and partnership document on the bedside table. When Arthur's parents passed away, your father took him in, Harrison. You grew up together as brothers in spirit before corporate greed poisoned your mind. And more importantly, the judge looked directly at Elena, then at Arthur, and finally opened a secondary manila folder containing a certified DNA ancestry record and birth certificate. Arthur didn't just lose his company, Harrison. On the night you had him run out of town by your thugs, his wife was hospitalized giving birth to their second child, a child that your security team mistakenly reported as stillborn to cut all ties. But the nurse smuggled the baby out and placed her safely for adoption, into the hands of a grieving couple who could never have children of their own. The judge turned the final page toward Elena and Arthur. Elena gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. The name on the birth certificate wasn't Vance. It was Pendleton. Elena Vance was not a billionaire's biological daughter bought into a life of cold luxury. She was Arthur's flesh and blood, the baby girl he thought he had lost forever on the darkest night of his life. Harrison Vance had secretly adopted her years later through a closed, corrupted agency to mold an heir, knowing full well whose blood ran through her veins as a cruel trophy of his corporate victory. Arthur stared at Elena, his eyes welling up with a torrent of tears. He looked at her face, the exact shape of her eyes, the gentle curve of her smile, and realization hit him like a physical blow. My baby girl, Arthur choked out, his voice breaking as he reached out a trembling hand. Elena fell to her knees beside the hospital bed, burying her face in Arthur's chest as the dam broke. Salute. Heavy tears poured from both of them. Even Harrison Vance, the ruthless titan of industry, stumbled backward, his face draining of all color as he realized his empire of lies had finally crumbled around him. The truth hadn't just brought tears to everyone in the room. It washed away a decade of cold isolation, healing a broken family, and proving that no amount of money could ever buy the priceless warmth of a father's love. Thank you for watching this HeartNest story. Pleading face. If this journey touched your heart, or made you hold your loved ones a little closer today, please leave a like to let us know. We would love to hear from you. Tell us in the comments below, which moment of the story was your favorite. Your beautiful words inspire us to keep bringing these tales to life. If you haven't joined our family yet, please subscribe to HeartNest Stories and hit that bell icon, so you never miss a heartfelt moment. Click the video on your screen right now for another story that will tug at your heartstrings. Until next time, take care of yourself and keep spreading love. Goodbye.